Hello and welcome. I am Dr. Lara May, a clinical pharmacist specializing in functional medicine, as well as a certified yoga teacher and Reiki master. I run a truly integrative health coaching practice encompassing functional medicine lab testing, yoga and meditation, and a sprinkling of Reiki energy medicine. Join me here on Light Body Radio to break through your health plateau and come into alignment with your natural vitality. Hello and welcome to Light Body Radio. I am your host, Dr. Lara May, and today we have back with us for, I would say, a part two, if you will, Dr. Stephanie Bacon. She is dedicated to making the world a better place. She is a teacher, a mother, researcher, motivational speaker, breathwork facilitator, and active member of 2 international peace and mindfulness organizations. At the heart of her work is a recognition of the magnificent power of humans to create, connect, and solve problems when they are fed, housed, and socially and emotionally well. Her research contributes to a growing body of empirical evidence highlighting the importance of social and emotional skills in fostering health, happiness, and productivity. Stephanie's work specifically focuses on how classroom teachers and teacher leaders promote or inhibit well-being in schools and their surrounding communities. She views teachers and teacher leaders as ripple makers whose relational presence in the classroom has profound and far-reaching impacts. And through her research and advocacy, Stephanie strives to create meaningful changes in schools, communities, and the world. So thank you so much for being here. I'm happy to have you again.
I'm so glad to be back. I've been excited about this for a while.
Yeah, so this time we're going to focus mainly on the breathwork piece. And so I would like, if you don't mind, to sort of tell us how you came to be a breathwork facilitator and how that came into your life and why you're choosing now to, have it be such an impactful piece and bringing that forward to the public.
Yeah, great. I think your listeners are going to be surprised because it is actually a funny story. So a couple years before the COVID pandemic, my girlfriend opened a yoga studio in town. And so I was excited I was like, oh, this is a great reason to become a regular at yoga. And so I would go once or twice a week to a vinyasa class, and I would really enjoy the class. But by the time we got to Shavasana, where you lay down for, at the time I didn't know how long, but essentially I learned later, it's like 3 minutes. They leave like 3 minutes at the end of the class where you just have to be still. And I can remember asking my friend, like, hey, do you mind if I leave before Shavasana? And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I just don't have time. And that is to tell your listener how busy I really thought I needed to be, that I did not have 3 minutes, people, to sit and breathe and not move. So clearly I was very dysregulated. I would say I was a very high functioning, dysregulated teacher, mother, baseball coach, volunteer, union leader. Like, I was doing all the things. Life looked good on Facebook and Instagram, but I did not have 3 minutes to rest or breathe. And ultimately, it did catch up to me. And I didn't even know that it was that dysregulation catching up to me. I couldn't see it. But essentially, I got to a point where I was really struggling in my marriage and couldn't really see any other way to fix it other than getting out. And ultimately, that I later learned that it was because I had like no regulation, no ability to see both sides of the story, how I could feel badly, but it wasn't necessarily everyone else's fault. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some emotional immaturity, I would admit, that I could not see, because when you're in a perpetual state of busyness, you can only access the wisdom of your mind, which is telling you stories, which often is protecting you from what's true that might hurt your ego, that your stress isn't everyone else's fault, that you actually have control. And so I wound up, getting a divorce, and the divorce led me to this path of like self-knowledge, right? So all of a sudden I have this empty space and time to think about what is going on for me. And ultimately and I think I talked about this in the first interview, that the first thing I had to do was just stop trying to be perfect, because you can never rest. There is certainly no time to breathe when you're trying to do everything perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And once it was like one small step of not being perfect, like missing a friend's birthday party and being like, you know what, I love you and I can't make it. And then feeling so good that I could express what was true, that I care about the friend, and I couldn't do the thing perfectly. And then there was this freedom, and it was like a snowball of like, wow, what else would come into my life if I let go of doing everything and made room for being? And I also want to share with your listeners that at that time, I mean, I had read all the books, okay? The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, a lot of books by Thich Nhat Hanh. They didn't mean, like, I knew what they were saying, but my body couldn't do it. So in addition to life coaching, I invested, and I'm a person that wouldn't pay for a latte. It was too expensive. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, well, I got to do something. I'll pay for life coaching every week. And I also invested in a class with Kathy Heller. And from that class, I learned that investing in my own personal energy and my own, which meant taking 100% responsibility for my experience, was really rewarding. And so during that class, it was like a class a couple of years ago where you're just like online and there's a little chat community. And she introduced a friend of hers who was a breathwork facilitator. I'd never heard of breathwork. I had no idea. I knew what yoga was. I knew what meditation was. I knew what Tai Chi was. Never heard of breathwork. And I signed up for the free trial. And the woman, her name's Samantha Skelly. She runs a breathwork facilitators training program, and she has a podcast as well. Her energy was just magnetic. The way she talked about life, the way she talked about how she learned, the way she talked about finding the wisdom of the body. And then at the end of her little talk, there was like a 15-minute breath practice. And I was still so dysregulated or still so busy that I really struggled with it. But what I thought is, if it works for her, because her story resonated with me in terms of being really busy and struggling with some unproductive behaviors, her energy was so magnetic. I was like, I'll do it. I'll do it if I can be like her. And I've never done that. Like I said, I was a person that would not pay for a latte because it was, $4 more expensive than a cup of regular brew. And so I've kept making these investments. And the beginning of the course blew my mind, because it was like 3 weeks of just noticing the sensations in your body and allowing those sensations to have some wisdom and not making them go away immediately. And so the first thing we learned was really just how to feel our body. And so, for your listener right now, let's say you're in the car or you're on the walk, I would invite your listener to just notice any areas of tension in the body. And I would say personally, I notice I have tension in my face and tension in my chest. And the tension in my face probably has to do with, I know I'm going to talk a lot, and there's a little bit, I hope I get this right. But of course, I'm no longer trying to be perfect. So that's kind of, I can be relieved. But when we pause and allow the feeling to be felt, often there's a much more nuanced understanding that we can get. So for example, a lot of times when there's some kind of interaction that's uncomfortable, say it's with a partner or with a child that's, your kid is misbehaving, you get this tension in your body. And a lot of times our first response is, this makes me angry and this other person needs to stop. And so the anger creates a certain kind of angry reaction. It could be something that, a shout back. It could be a really reactive thing. It could be a name calling. It could be a shutdown, like I'm just going to exit and kind of stonewall. But when we pause and keep feeling, which means we don't make it go away by like trying to tell someone else to do, what's underneath that is usually a different emotion. And a lot of times it's either a sadness or oftentimes it's fear. And when we get in touch with that fear, then we can approach that situation from a completely different angle. So a really good example is, it's the winter time and my son was leaving for school and I look out the window and his windshield was covered with ice. And he had scraped about the size of a baseball to drive to school. And I was so mad. And I stood in front of his car and I'm like screaming, but he can't hear me because the car's going and he has like a baseball size thing. And of course he has his music on, right? So loud. I'm screaming. Finally, this isn't working. So I get on my phone and I call him as he's driving down the road. And I did like yell into the phone, you will stop this car, your car right now, right? And then I just took a breath and I said, it really scares me when you drive like that because I'm pretty sure you can't see and I'm afraid of you getting hurt. That changes the whole dynamic because my first scream resulted in him screaming back at me and frankly giving me hand gestures as he got out of his car. As soon as I said I was scared, problem solved. Because when I said I was scared of him driving like that, I was communicating, I care about you. Right? So all of that is only the product of me learning the role of breath in nervous system regulation and also in my ability to be clear with what is actually true. Am I angry? Am I mad at him? Not as much as I am scared. And so that is one of the most beautiful gifts of the breath. And that's what kind of kept me going. So as soon as I learned in those first kind of courses, like, oh gosh, my feelings aren't facts. I don't need to justify the anger. I don't need to tell him what an idiot he was for driving like that. Right? Because that would justify my anger. I don't need to lecture him about how stupid it is.
Right.
Right? When I get into it, the emotion that is most important is fear and safety. Right? My fear is around safety. So ultimately, like my path to breathwork it's so crazy that I had never done a breathwork class and I paid $7,000 to become a breathwork facilitator. And in my world, that's big money, right?
Yeah.
7K is a couple of vacations.
Right.
But is when you are around people, when you're exposed to people that are very energetically clean and loving and open, they are magnetic. And it was that woman and Samantha Skelly, how I was just like, yeah, I want a piece of that. And I've gotten it. Like, I really feel like I am a person with clean energy. I am a person who I have learned how to love myself in this process, which makes all the other bumps in my life go so much better because I know where to come back to.
Mm-hmm.
So the breath has just been a tremendous gift for me. And then, of course, there's the science.
Right. Yeah. I want to definitely get into the science, but first I would just like to really bring some um, attention to the fact that it seems like as you were going through this journey, like your emotional vocabulary was really unfolding. And I think so many of us don't even have, like, we're not even able to like put words to what we're feeling. We know it's an uncomfortable feeling, but we maybe sometimes can't even like call it what it is. Or maybe we just, like you said, like maybe we think it's either anger or fear, but there's so many more. And I love how this was really, like a journey of self-discovery for you.
Yes. And you bring up such an important point, and I would love listeners to just pause on that. The fact that it can take quite a bit of time to know what is really true for you emotionally, and because we're so uncomfortable saying, I'm not sure, a lot of times we'll say what comes first to us, which actually isn't true. So many times the first reaction that is going to pop up to us is going to be our ego's desire to protect itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the way our ego protects itself is by making sure everyone else has the problems and it's not our problem. Unfortunately, that takes all of the control for solving it away from us. Because if it's everyone else's problem that I'm angry or that I'm frustrated or that this thing didn't happen, I have no control.
Right.
And so pausing to actually feel like, what is this that I actually need? What am I actually feeling? And can I get it myself? Often you can. And so there's that freedom that like, oh yes, I actually need this. I was traveling with some people that had a really hard time getting out the door on time. And it was driving me crazy because at the same time I had, you know how it is when you work full time and then on the weekends, your weekends are like, you got to get it all done. You got to have some fun. And then you also have to do the laundry, the firewood, the bills, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was like, I spent a lot of time in this discomfort because inside I was like, holy cow, people, like, put your shoes on, grab your breakfast, like we can be moving, right? And then I thought to myself, I was like, wait, this may be how they move through the world. And I am obviously not going to change that for adult people, right? So what do I have control over? I'm going to take responsibility, the fact that I move faster. And so I told this group of people, I was like, the next time we travel, let's just make some agreements about when you want to go and when I want to go. And I might just meet you there. And boy, was that freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so uncomfortable. I'd say I probably spent like 45 minutes in discomfort, trying to figure out where I had power. But imagine if I had spent those 45 minutes judging them for how they moved through the world, being like, obviously they don't have any self-discipline. Look at how they weren't prepared for this little outing that we're doing. I could have judged them and just raised that agitation, just light that on fire. And instead I was like, well, what is it really? It's really that I just move at a quicker pace. And actually there's a part of me that wishes I didn't move at such a quick pace and I could chill out like them. So why should I, stay in this agitation when there is a way for me to control? But again, that's emotional and self-awareness. Mm-hmm. That doesn't come if you never slow down to feel it and really allow your body to speak to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think even taking it back to your original story about how you were feeling, too busy for Savasana for 3 minutes. And my first thought was like, oh, I think Americans are straight A students at being busy. I mean, like,
100%.
there's a lot that we don't do well, but being busy is the one thing that we do excellently.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of us, especially as we get older and we enter different phases and seasons of our life, and we're faced with different challenges and recognitions, we really have to decide, is this busyness me? Is it mine? Or is it something I've been taught to do? And is it something that I want to keep doing, or do I want to change it? And, I mean, there's a reason why when we go to a yoga class, I've heard it more than once. No, you can't leave before Savasana. And I've always
Right.
thought to myself, because like I'm a busy person too, but for me, like that's like like my permission is like to finally give myself that exhale. But I think even looking back, like I'm sure there was a time in my life where I would not have noticed that I even needed that, let alone provided myself the space to participate in something like that. So,
Exactly. And so what you highlight is that often busyness is a coping mechanism.
mhm.
And for me, it was a way to make myself feel worthy. It was like, if I do all the things, then I am worthy of love. I'm worthy of status in my family or whatever at the time. Now I just want love. I don't need status. But at the time, maybe I felt like I needed status. It was a way for me to get something I needed, but it wasn't going to work. That's never going to work, because actually, at some point when you want love, you have to be there. You can't just be doing all the time. And it's really hard for people to love you when you're so busy. And that also doesn't mean you're opting out of shavasana. You're also not fully being present when you're around them. You're not being a good listener. You're trying to control a lot of times, because if you are so busy, there are so many moving pieces that then often you're trying to control people around you, which is hard to show up in a loving way and also control everybody.
Mhm.
They kind of go hand in hand. And, all of us have stories about how we were raised. And I think my parents did a great job with the tools they had. And at the same time, there were some generational gaps in their experience as humans, and they didn't necessarily know how to give me that sense of self-worth. So I thought, if I do everything, get really, I mean, it started very young, get all straight A's, right? Play all the sports, volunteer for all the committees. And I never felt peace. And it's actually been really hard, something I've had to learn, to receive love for just being a human. And I know I'm not alone in that. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us have our different coping mechanisms where we're just trying to get that basic human need for love or security or connection met in ways that involve others, but we're not sure how to connect with others until we really connect with our heart. We instead try to control or to get validation in, those kinds of affirmations of our worth, when actually, ultimately, we have to give it to ourselves, because we are the person that's always around.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's always, that instead of seeking and chasing, like everything we need in theory is already inside of us. We just have to be able to recognize it and nourish it and, you know, um, be, and again, a human being instead of a human doing.
Right. Yeah. And I can remember a huge yearning. I just was like, oh, I'm working so hard. I'm doing all these things. I wish people understood. But no one was going to understand me, because I wasn't taking the time to understand me. I didn't know why I was doing everything. And frankly, I was exhausted because I didn't know how to say no to things that were like a maybe. And so I was totally overbooked and had no time to really get to know myself. Yet I was expecting people like don't you understand me? You understand where I'm coming from? Can you give me a little empathy? You don't get it. You don't get me.
Yeah.
But really that starts with us getting us and us choosing what's an absolute yes for us and saying a no to everything else so that we have that room. But again, a lot of people, I struggled being busy. A lot of people struggle to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And there is definitely some importance to what comes in times of solitude.
And technically that Shavasana time is solitude. Like, yes, you might be in a room full of people, but it's, if you're, really tuning in and coming to that heart-centered place and just, feeling your body and listening to your breath, that's solitude.
Yes. Yes, I've come a long way. Now I can't wait to Shavasana. I barely make it through a yoga class. I just
Yeah.
It's really, I have to tell you, I had an MRI today and I was literally zoned out, no stress. You're in there for like 20 minutes with the banging. And I'm like, this is great because I have to stay still. And so your audience knows we're talking like, this is like over a period of 3 or 4 years, a complete transition from like, I do not have 3 minutes to let me lay in this MRI and completely I was happy and peaceful, not a thing,
Right. Well, and also too, just for a point of reference, since we're on the subject of Savasana, the way I was taught in my Kundalini yoga teacher training is that you should have equal parts movement and Savasana. So for every minute you're moving through asana, then you should give equal time to Shavasana. So in theory, we should really be laying there for like an hour, 90 minutes, whatever,
I love that. That sounds fantastic.
Right.
I'm going to quit my job, Shavasana, tomorrow.
Yeah. So, well, let's get back into sort of maybe just how is breath work different from actual breathing, just for those of, for the complete newbies out there, and maybe just also as a reminder for the rest of us too. And then I'm sure you'll weave in some science into that as well.
Absolutely. So let's just put breath in general on a spectrum, right? So breath is amazing, right? So it's one of those things our body can do without us telling it to, or we can totally control it and have it do whatever we want. So breath is on a spectrum. And so when we're breathing and our body, is just doing it as part of its autonomic nervous system, and like you're just breathing, you may breathe in relation to what external stimulus is happening, right? So you're watching a movie, an exciting part, you might start breathing more quickly, or maybe you're nervous and you might be breathing more shallow. And then other times, like you're trying to relax and you'll lengthen your breaths, right? And it'll almost happen automatically. The other thing that will happen automatically sometimes is a sigh. So you will not consciously think to do it, but a sigh is going to sound like, ah. And actually other wild animals have their own version of the sigh. And it's definitely a stress release response that your body will do automatically. And so breath work on the, I would say, more mellow end of the spectrum, for lack of a better word, could be anything you're doing to control the breath. So for example, I notice when I'm in a more regular yoga practice or breath practice, I will catch myself sighing at work more often. And it's because my body's kind of gotten into that practice of the longer breaths. You could call that breath work. But what a lot of people are also maybe seeing in terms of, you'll see it in health-related YouTube channels or podcasts, is a very much more activated breath work. Mm-hmm. And on the far end of the spectrum is controlling your breathing for long periods of time with a degree of force and activation that changes the pH in your blood and therefore has some very significant physiological and energetic effects. And so, often you'll hear people talk about Wim Hof breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's several different kind of breath work programs that kind of name breaths differently. But every breath work program that I've come across myself is essentially playing with the inhale and exhale and the entry and exit points. And those activated breaths are out the mouth, or really big in the nose and out the mouth. And so normal day-to-day breathing, what we want to be doing is breathing in and out the nose. It's a relaxing breath. It's slower. It's actually better for our immune function, right? Because the structure of the nose is kind of filtering out any threats to our immune system, right? But humans over time, as we have started to cook our foods and chew less hard food, our jaws have evolved to be smaller, and the structure of our kind of breathing nose to mouth has changed, and we've become more mouth breathers.
Mm.
And so this has changed our nervous systems overall as a population, so that when you're mouth breathing, anytime you breathe out of your mouth, like if you're doing a Wim Hof breath practice, you're doing a bunch of activating breath where you're actually almost putting yourself into a panic attack, right? Because to get those energetic and physiological shifts. Well, if we're going through our days in shallow breathing through our mouths, we are really providing a stimulus to our nervous system that we didn't necessarily have generations ago. And so that when I say that breath is on a spectrum, it's that, we have our very calming natural breath that hopefully your body is doing if you are in, a place where you are fed and housed and you feel emotionally stable. You'll breathe in and out of your nose and you'll just be like massaging your nervous system, and life is easy. The more we're stimulated, we move on that spectrum, and that impacts the amount of oxygen in our blood. It impacts the pH in our blood, and has this impact on our nervous systems. So I hope that clarifies. The other thing I would add too is what I've noticed in like the breathwork world is you will have, like, you could get an app on your phone and you can find like a 1-minute breath practice that actually is impactful, all the way to like full day experiences around breath work where someone is watching you breathe to make sure you are doing what the facilitator is saying for a long time.
Oh, wow.
So I would say how we are using breath work and what offerings are out there, they're on just as big of a spectrum, from 1-minute breath practice to 3-hour breath practice.
Yeah. And I mean, so I think from my personal experience, most of my breathwork practice comes from yoga, and specifically with the intentional piece of it and those activating breaths, the Kundalini yoga tradition. But Kundalini yoga utilizes both, fast breathing in and out the nose, and, or, sometimes in and out the mouth, like we call it the cannonball breath or something. Pardon me. Why is that? I'm supposed to be on Do Not Disturb.
Whoops.
Whoopsies.
It happens to the best of us.
Anyway, so I just wanted to reinforce exactly what you just said, is that like we can be exposed to breath work in a variety of different ways and a variety of different traditions. I think it's helpful to understand that. I think the intention, but I think that's where I want to come to with this, is that like what is your intention behind what you're doing? Even if you're a student in a yoga class, there should be some sort of explanation behind the breath work, behind the breath that you're doing. Like if it's a vinyasa class, it's the ujjayi breath, right? Or if you're in a Kundalini class, maybe someone's teaching you breath of fire or the cannonball breath or something like that. So, but they do all have a different physiological effect, like you said, because that pH is changing. So, like in the body, we have a mixture of oxygen and CO2, and then that carbon dioxide can also mix with sodium, and then we'll have, a bicarbonate. And so this also affects our acid base balance. And I could get like really geeked out into the science. And
I am so glad you got all those words, because I am more on the soft side of breath work.
well,
how does it make me feel better? How does it help me in my relationships in my life?
Well, and I think like this is the big important link though, because we don't understand really the why. Why does it make us feel better? And it's because of when you're bringing in the oxygen with those slow, calm, deep breaths through the nose, then you're oxygenating your blood, and that's helping, relax smooth muscle. And so there is, and like you said, you referred to the autonomic nervous system, and it's, taking it out of that automatic autopilot and into the intentional space. And that's where I also think this concept of the personal journey that you are on also comes into play, because now once we're intentional, then we can also start bringing in those questions of how does this make me feel? How do I feel when I don't do it? How do I feel when I do it? What's the difference? All of those things. So yeah, it's fascinating that it can seem so simple, but it can be so powerful.
Absolutely. And I think that's one thing that, in our modern society, people often don't realize the intelligence of the heart and the body. This is not something we learn, at least in the United States. I know there are other cultures that spend a lot more time teaching children, even in school, about the wisdom of the body. But how would we design an entity that isn't fully intelligent, right? And when we, those of us who like to watch like nature documentaries and look at the wisdom of animals and how they interact with their environments, and even plants, right? So humans are designed just as well. And that means that we have more intelligence. Our mind is a small part of our being. And so we were given this tool of breath that we don't have to think about, or we can think about. And what's really incredible is how many different ways we can play with it. When I first started my training, they were like, play with the breath. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. That sounds so stupid, play with my breath. But it's insane, right? So one of the breath practices that I like to do, for me, shifting from school teacher mode to like mom mode or into a facilitator mode, I really have to change my energy. And oftentimes I'm on my way to do something. So just the other day, I was shifting from teacher to breathwork facilitator, and I needed to go to the grocery store in between. And I was like, I've got to shift my energy. I'm just not feeling like I can show up for people. And I tried this pulse breath where you're literally just like in and out your nose in pulses differently. So for me, it was like 3 pulses out my nose, 3 pulses in my nose. And I was like, I'm just going to do this play with my breath thing. Literally I can remember, like by the time I got to the yogurt aisle, I was totally like in a different mood. And that's how breath is such a crazy tool. I would guess, and I'm not a scientist of this kind of science. I do research, but it's like qualitative and very touchy-feely. But like, I'm guessing part of what happened is I had to concentrate for a couple of seconds to get the pulsing, but I also changed the oxygenation of my blood. And I literally, I almost like forgot about my workday in a minute or two. And so by the time I left the grocery store, I was shifted. My energetic state was different. And that is such a small thing to do. Think about the times we're in our car and maybe you get a phone call that's activating, and then we have to go home and meet our family. Sit in your car for a minute and do some kind of conscious breath. I do like the pulse breath. You can do it out your mouth too. I'll blow so people can hear it. A lot of times our exhale will create our inhales. You don't even have to think. People, if you are like feeling something big, just change your exhale. Just make it longer. Because the longer your exhale is, all of a sudden the inhale is longer, all of a sudden you've got more oxygen in your blood, all of a sudden you might be a new human, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you did mention too that it doesn't have to be long in order for it to be powerful. I mean, I think just you describing the exercise that you just did, but also too, when you mentioned the app, you mentioned like something as short as 60 minutes, or just like when you said, like, don't go in the house yet, spend a minute in your car.
Yes, I've been using a 5-minute breath practice because I know meditation is important for me. I'm using it as a tool to help deal with some back pain that I have, but I'm still a busy mind. And so I use a 5-minute breath practice before I meditate. And I use an app just for your listeners. Like, this is hard for me. I need help. Hold my hand. And the 5-minute breath practice is really simple. Breath practice with holds, which I will invite your listeners to do at the end of this program. And those holds are really beautiful ways to shift your energy. You can actually feel a shift in energy when you hold your breath. And then I would say the other thing, that the breath is just such a beautiful tool. So when you're feeling like you need more energy, if you hold your breath on the in breath, so you take you do some big breaths and then you hold on the in breath, that will give you energy. You'll actually, when you practice it, you'll feel the energy coming into you. If you're struggling with anxiety, you can hold on the out breath and you'll feel like this pull downward. And holds without the out breath are harder. You feel like you're gonna, which is weird. Yeah, it makes sense actually. You've pushed your breath out and your body's like, this is what I need to be alive. But when you just have oxygenated your blood with activated breath, or you just relax into that hold, knowing that people can hold their breaths for quite long, you will feel a grounding. So that's why breath is such a beautiful tool, depending on what you're experiencing in your life.
Mm-hmm. So I have a feeling you've prepared something to demonstrate for us today.
I have. So
yeah?
Before we jump into the demo,
okay,
I would say to your listeners, if you're traveling or walking or whatever, just pause. And when you have literally, I don't know, I'm only going to go less than 10 minutes. So 8 to 10 minutes, find a quiet space, close your eyes, and engage in this practice. The other thing I want to do is to let the listener know that even in this very short practice, they can experience some significant physiological effects. And it can be actually kind of fun. But one of the weird ones is you can experience tetany. And so what that feels like is your mouth getting really tight and your hands wanting to clam up. And I know some people would think, how can I even do that in less than 10 minutes of breath? But you really can. That's how much you're changing your blood. You can feel a little lightheaded depending on how you experience big breaths, or maybe kind of what you're bringing to the breath practice. And that's why I would say make sure I prefer to lie down, but people can sit up. I also would say you can get a buzzing feeling. I love that buzzing feeling, and I actually kind of lean into it. It comes for me during the breath holds, but for other people, it can come during the kind of lead up to the breath holds, the activated breaths. And then also it can make you either hot or cold. Most people wind up getting a little cool with the activated breath patterns. So if you want to like have a blanket nearby, that can feel really good too. The last thing I would say is, on the breath work spectrum, there are going to be people that say you have to do it just like I'm saying and to get any benefits. And the way I was taught through pause breath work is that really the person breathing should have their foot on the brake and the gas, meaning slowing the breath down when it feels uncomfortable is perfectly fine. The intensity of your breath is not going to dictate the benefits. Okay, you're going to get breath benefits no matter what, and you don't have to like push yourself to passing out. And it is, for some people, have a greater tolerance for big breaths, and other people have less tolerance. So yeah, so what I could go ahead, I'm going to get some audio going for us. And like I said, we are going to do just a less than 10 minutes because I want people to know how powerful this can be. And so as we get started, I'm going to invite your audience to just close their eyes or soften the gaze. And at first, to just notice the natural breath in and out of the nose. And now just connecting with other parts of the body, noticing any tension in the body, and allowing yourself to meet that tension with love. Perhaps you want to invite the breath to that area of tension, drawing it perhaps to the forehead or the space behind the eyes, or to the tightness in the chest. The inhale, bringing the breath to that space in the body, and with the exhale, softening. Taking a moment here to visualize your connection to the earth. How you are supported by your bed or your chair, your couch. Feeling that beneath your body, feeling held. And as I start the next song, we're actually going to go into an activated breath, and we're going to go into the nose and out the mouth. It's going to sound like this. You can, if it feels aligned for you, match your breath to the rhythm of the music, or you can stay in a slower pace. But if you're matching the music, it might sound like you stay in that breath. Allowing the inhale to be forceful, but the exhale can just be allowing the breath to flow out. We're going to stay in this breath pattern for 30 more seconds, and then we're going to take a hold. You're almost there. Big inhale in. And hold. You're holding at the top, noticing the energy in your body, relaxing any muscles that you may have not noticed are tight. Releasing the breath hold only when you feel ready, and coming back to that big inhale through the nose and relaxed exhale out the mouth. Just like that, you're doing great. If it's your first time and there's a little discomfort, be proud of yourself for trying. We're going to go about 15 more seconds here, and then we're going to try a hold at the bottom. Invitation to increase the inhale. Three more inhales. 2, 3. Blow all the air out. Hold at the bottom. Reconnecting with the earth, noticing how you are held by your bed or your chair. Releasing that hold only when you feel ready. Coming back to your natural breath through the nose and out through the nose. Reconnecting with your body, noticing any shifts in tension, and experimenting with relaxing any tension that hasn't resolved. Invitation to elongate the exhales here. Allow the exhale to cue your body to soften. Maybe cue your mind to soften as well. Invitation here to consider any perspectives that maybe weren't available to you before clearing with the breath. Inviting some movement into the body. Maybe it would feel good to roll the ankles or the wrists, or to shift the head back and forth. And only when you're ready, maybe opening the eyes and returning to the room. Taking any wisdom that your body held in the breath with you. Perhaps there's some aligned action in your next move for today.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
You're welcome. I hope your audience enjoyed it.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I would also just encourage any of you out there, we didn't say this at the beginning, but if you do happen to have another journal, really with the phone today, Lara, you might want to journal what came up for you during the breath work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Usually there is some pop of wisdom that the body will be like, oh, you slowed down for me. I got something to say.
Right. Well, please tell us where people can find you and all of your beautiful work.
The best place to find me is at stephaniebacon.net in my imperfect and soon to be upgraded website. I also do a lot of chatter on TikTok. I'm Stephanie Bacon 7 on TikTok, and that's where I talk about just like some gems of social and emotional competence and how that can look in your family and relational life and also in the classroom. And I've also started to put some writing out on LinkedIn. I'm Stephanie Bacon, PhD on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with your listeners. I actually did get an email from a listener saying they really enjoyed the podcast and a lot of the ideas that we put out in the last podcast resonated with them. So that felt fantastic.
Yeah, beautiful. I love hearing that stuff too. Yes. Well, great. Thank you again, Stephanie. I so much appreciate all the work that you're doing and your insights and your wisdom that you're bringing to it as well. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with your audience.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So as always, these show notes and all of the links to find Stephanie will live in the show notes, and that's at drlaramay.com/podcasts. So we will, again, thank Stephanie so much for being here, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye, everybody.